Under the puddles, completely covering the asphalt, it was simply impossible to tell where the potholes were hiding. No matter how hard Oleg tried to reduce his speed, the wheels kept hitting the potholes. Another plunge and a passing girl on the sidewalk found herself splashed from head to toe. Apologies were not accepted as the young lady quickly expressed her thoughts, without mincing words, about those who raced on the roads. To make matters worse, she got splashed again at the next turn. The enormous cumbersome jeep was heavy, so even a small pothole became disastrous, and once again it was drenched with cold water. "I'm sorry, please, you understand, I didn't do it on purpose," said Oleg. "Let me pay for dry cleaning and buy you a new coat." She just snorted and walked away, muttering unpleasant comments about the weather and drivers in general. On his way, Oleg stopped by the supermarket, bought what was dictated to him on the apartment owner's list, and headed home, anticipating a great dinner. Klavdiya Semenovna turned out to be an excellent cook, and once again, Oleg silently thanked the director of the orphanage who had recommended him to stay with the former chef. He loved this small town in general, although he had experienced some difficult situations here. Pleasant memories of the people made his 3 years here decisive in his life. He had met other people back then, and who knows how his fate would have turned out now. During the years of perestroika, Oleg's father quickly caught the wave and started his own business. He opened stores and kiosks, expanded his business, and he was successful. Not everyone liked it, especially his competitors, who realized that intimidation alone wouldn't work. They decided to go to the bank, but something went wrong, and during the attack on his wife and young son, the woman died, and their 2-year-old boy disappeared. Overwhelmed with grief, the father devoted all his efforts to finding Oleg, but the child seemed to vanish without a trace. With each passing day, his hope of seeing him again became increasingly faint. Sergei became closed off and tough. Now, his competitors didn't even dare to scare him. How could they scare someone who had already lost everything? Then, on one of the gray and gloomy days in November, the phone rang. An unfamiliar female voice hesitantly asked about his son. Fate showed mercy to Oleg, who had experienced intense stress during the attack and didn't want to talk when they brought him to the orphanage. He looked like a frightened little wolf, hiding in corners and desperately avoiding people. Day by day, the care and attention of the caregivers brought him back to life, and it was only after 3 years that his memory began to return in fragments. Director Zoya Petrovna managed to piece together the puzzle, and Oleg's father was finally found. It was a difficult time, as they had to rebuild their relationship and find common ground with a son who had grown distant from him. A fortunate incident helped during the next New Year's celebration. Oleg, while decorating the lush fir tree, suddenly started talking about the orphanage, how they waited for presents there, how few toys and joys they had, even though the staff did their best but lacked funds. That's when the tradition was born, to celebrate every holiday. As Sergei visited the small town, he marveled at how enjoyable it was to do something nice for others. The sparkling eyes of the children and the genuine gratitude of the caregivers healed his soul in a way no doctor could. Oleg's decision to start his own business was met with enthusiasm by Sergei, who saw him grow into a mature adult with a clear mind and good business acumen. Even Oleg's idea to open a business in that same town didn't surprise his father. He explained that it wasn't just about emotions. The favorable location, lack of competition in that niche, and other factors made the decision wise. Sergei blessed it and promised to assist in every way. Oleg's decision brought Klavdiya Semyonovna into his life. She was a petite, spry old lady, sharp-tongued and lively. Upon arriving in the town, Oleg visited Zoya Petrovna and said, "I don't want to stay in a hotel, especially since I have nowhere to go yet. Can you recommend someone who rents out a room?" Half an hour later, Oleg was already inspecting an old house with high ceilings and listening to his new landlady. They quickly became friends, and as Oleg recalled Klavdiya Semyonovna's culinary masterpieces, his mouth watered. He was a restaurateur himself, but there were things she could surprise even him with. Opening the door, Oleg quickly took off his shoes and walked into the kitchen. He fell silent in surprise as the very person he had sprayed water on provocatively looked at him. It took some time for Oleg to reconcile with Alya, but eventually they managed it. Their romance developed rapidly, but it wasn't long-lasting. Oleg soon knew which restaurant he wanted to buy and negotiated the deal. He was lucky because the owner didn't want to live in a small town and had received an offer to work abroad. Time was running out, and Oleg managed to negotiate a good price. Now it was a matter of completing the remaining tasks, developing a strategy, purchasing new furniture, and other details. Alya would leave for a short while, but she would return soon to stay forever. The girl was not herself, she couldn't have expected such a sudden separation. She hoped that Oleg wouldn't deceive her. But Oleg didn't come then, he didn't do it on purpose. When he returned home, everything became chaotic, and he forgot about the pain. They hadn't been together for long, and he wasn't thinking about serious relationships at that time. Besides, he was warmly welcomed by Dasha, whom he had previously dated. The socialite knew how to captivate a young man. By the way, Oleg felt that Darya looked much more stunning as his companion. In the depths of his soul, memories of Alya scratched at him, but his time was scheduled to the minute. Then his father fell ill, his heart ached, and he had to stay by his side for a whole year. He managed the purchased restaurant from a distance, sending a competent specialist there. It was only after 3 years that he decided to finally wrap things up. Dasha was preparing to go with him. Oleg didn't make any proposals to her, and she didn't refuse. She reasonably noted that it was her decision, not his. He didn't have the conscience to meet Olga and her grandmother, so he spent a couple of nights in a hotel and found a house outside the city. It was luxurious with its own pond and garden, and although it was quite expensive, Oleg fell in love with the estate at first sight and didn't haggle. Dasha would come and then leave, she wanted to be by his side but didn't like the town. She couldn't find anything to occupy herself, and she was bored. In general, she hoped that Oleg would soon get tired of the provincial town and return to the capital, but Oleg was not thrilled for a different reason. Dasha turned out to be a mediocre housekeeper, although not much was required of her. Oleg couldn't keep any domestic helpers, no one could get along with her, as she was quarrelsome in everyday life and stubborn to the extreme. Moreover, she treated everyone condescendingly, considering herself a queen. It was time to end the comedy. He was on his way home to resolve the unpleasant matter once and for all. He had never returned so early before, nor had he stayed at work late, trying to spend as little time as possible with Dasha. There was no need to come up with anything. The girl, whom he initially saw as his companion, had a good time without him. Unambiguous sounds and laughter could be heard from the bedroom. Then she blamed him for not devoting enough time to her and for making her live in this unpleasant town. However, there were no long farewells. He simply called a taxi and paid for it, promising to collect and send her things later. It was only when the door closed behind Dasha and silence fell that Oleg realized how cozy his home was. Now there was no need to disappear at work, he could simply live for his own pleasure. There was one more delicate matter that needed to be resolved, and the young man decisively got into the car. Zoya Petrovna was very surprised to see her ward. New Year's was far away, yet he had come. Oleg even felt that she wasn't happy to see him, but he later found out the reason. Meanwhile, he tried to gently inform her that his father hadn't come for no reason, but because he was ill. Oleg had long suspected that there was something more between the two of them than met the eye. They were adults but behaved like children. His father shared how foolishly they had quarreled and how much he regretted his behavior. He asked Oleg to discreetly find out the situation as he wanted to come but was afraid. Suddenly Zoya got married while he was away, putting her in an awkward position. They were drinking tea and talking about how they had been living all this time. And suddenly a head peeked through the open door of the office. The little one was about 3 years old, still struggling with words, but he caught Oleg's attention because the child looked just like him. Zoya Petrovna averted her eyes in embarrassment and tried to take the child away, but Oleg stopped her. "Zoya Petrovna, is there something you haven't told me?" She blushed, and while she was thinking about what to say, a forgotten voice came from behind the guy, making him shudder. "It's nothing special, really, Zoya Petrovna. We're already leaving, don't get distracted." Alya hasn't changed much, although her eyes have become more serious. Oleg feverishly tried to count and think, but it wasn't going well. There was no doubt, that child was his son. When Alya left and the director sighed, realizing that a conversation was unavoidable. "You see, Oleg, when you left, Alya was eagerly waiting and wanted to surprise you, but when she realized that you had abandoned her, she got angry. But I didn't abandon her, if I had known. That's what she said too, she didn't want you to be with her just because of the child. Although she had to swallow her pride. Maxim was born weak. The treatment was expensive, and Alya even called you at that time, but your wife answered the phone." "Zoya Petrovna, but I don't have a wife and never did," Oleg exclaimed, taken aback. "Dasha, and then she ruined everything." They talked for a long time, and the guy learned that Klavdia Semyonovna had died, leaving her apartment to Oleg. Now they live there with Maxim, and Alya works for them so they don't have to send their son to daycare. Suddenly, someone knocked on the door. Without waiting for her son's response, his father had come. Oleg quickly retreated, realizing that the two of them had plenty to talk about without him. Illness had changed his father, he became softer and regretted many things he hadn't had time for, while Oleg had his own issues to resolve. He didn't expect Alya to make it so easy for him, he knew he had messed up badly, and she would need time to regain her trust. But he was determined to win her back. At the first glance, old feelings rushed back, and the guy reproached himself for behaving so thoughtlessly. He bought half the store's toys and now hesitated at the door. Finally, he mustered the courage to call. "It's you," Alya could only say, as Maxim peered out from behind, staring in surprise at the bright boxes. "Uncle, what's that?" The address stung his ears, but Oleg didn't blame anyone, he was to blame for not being there for the first years of the child's life. But he hoped to make it right. Fortunately, Alya didn't prohibit him from seeing their son. They even managed to reach a truce for Maxim's sake, as he quickly grew attached to his father. Gradually, the girl began to thaw. The day came when Oleg mustered the courage and proposed to her. "Oleg, I don't want you to do this for the sake of our son. I won't interfere with your relationship, so you don't have to worry." "But Alya, it's not just about that, you see, everything happened so fast back then. I didn't even have time to think, everything just spun. I know it's hard for you to believe me, but I'm telling the truth. I don't want to spend my life with anyone else but you." Then there were tears of apology and joy that they wanted to share with the whole world. But the world called first. "Son, I want you to know that Zoya and I have decided to get married. She agreed to be my wife." "Dad, well, okay, Oleg and I were just about to tell you the same thing." The small town remembered the double celebration for a long time. Oleg's restaurant couldn't accommodate all the guests. Friends came from the capital and were impressed with the establishment. "Oleg, why didn't you tell us you had such a place here? It's worth coming here for the weekend." And Oleg realized that from now on, he would have more customers. Country trips for weekends had become a trendy trend, so the guy hit the mark by deciding to buy the restaurant. But it seemed they would have to expand soon and consider opening a hotel as well. There weren't many in the town, but Oleg wasn't afraid of change, especially now that he had a family he was willing to move mountains for, and Alya, who was always ready to support him in everything. You know, Zoya, I think we'll have to babysit more than one grandchild soon. Just look at how they look at each other. Zoya Petrovna just smiled. Even though it was in the middle of life, she had still managed to find happiness. And it was so wonderful to have someone to simply look at.